Well, it's hard to believe that tomorrow morning we're going to get in a car with some other folks who are going to the Holy Land with us, and that by Wednesday we're going to be in Nazareth, we're going to be in Capernaum, we're going to be walking the shore of Galilee. Matter of fact, we're going to wake up on Wednesday morning on the Sea of Galilee. And I'm excited about this journey that we're on. And in the first 10 days, with others from our congregation and a few other friends from beyond our congregation, who are going to journey together through Israel, from the Sea of Galilee, places of Jesus' early ministry, down to the Dead Sea, and then up to Jerusalem, the great city that will remind us of all that Jesus was about. And we're excited about that. And thanks, Dottie and Jim, for your support and session support and Dottie's prayer for us. It's really important to us that you are praying for us and that you're with us on this journey. It's kind of a strange thing to actually be gone, and it's an interesting process of getting ready to leave, because you have to let go, and have to let go of responsibilities. And some of that sounds like a lot of fun, like you just think, in your fantasy, gee, if I could just let go of everything. It's hard letting go. It's hard preparing, and there's something emotional that takes place as well as physical as we're packing up and thinking, what do we really need? We're just really excited about this journey in our lives for the next 4 months, and appreciate your support and your encouragement. Many of you have sent us emails praying for us and wishing us well. Really appreciate that. This morning I want to set up the message series that you're going to be on, the journey that you're going to be on for the next 4 months, called Companions for the Journey. And I want to focus our attention on Hebrews 11 and 12. If you'll open your bulletin outline to this, some selected passages from Hebrews 11 and 12, I'd like to talk about, introduce the series, Companions for the Journey. Hebrews 11, 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. Now, the writer of Hebrews goes on to list many of those who set an example of faith, and then says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. And he continues to list more examples of faith in chapter 11. And then chapter 12, verse 1, therefore, right? And you always look back to see what the therefore is there for. And it's here, therefore, here's the call on our lives. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down in the right hand of the throne of God. First, I want to talk about faith for the journey. In verse 1, I want to talk about our faith for the journey. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Faith is described in this first verse with two phrases: sure of what we hope for and certain of what we don't see. What we hope for is the thing that is out ahead of us, that we long for, that we live for. Certain of what we don't see, that there is something real that we cannot see that guides our lives, that we are spiritual beings who relate to each other and to God on a spiritual level, not just a physical level. We relate to a God that we cannot see, that he is as real in our lives as each other is real in our lives. I love the song that Brendan just sang, the Revelation song, because it paints a picture of what worship looks like in heaven. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. The one that I long for, the one that I desire, and that is a future hope, and it's a present reality. A journey of faith is becoming more and more certain of what we don't see. Being certain of what we don't see. My faith in heaven plays back into my life today. It's not just a pie in the sky, whatever happens on this earth, whatever, I'm just waiting for heaven. It's what the ancients were commended for, their faith that became faithfulness to overcome whatever obstacles were before them on their journey of faith. They were living their faith when they died, the writer of Hebrews affirms. They were living their faith when they died. Wouldn't that be a great thing for someone to say about us? They were living their faith when they died. What's true about Christianity that may not be true for other faith systems is that Christianity calls us to focus on heaven, but not to escape from this world. We're called to focus our eyes on heaven, to be certain of what we don't see, to be sure of what we hope for, and yet not escape from this world. We're not called to go live on a mountaintop someplace and escape. A sabbatical is not meant to be the way we live life. It's meant to be a retreat. For us to enter back into the world refreshed, we're supposed to keep our eyes fixed on heaven, but it plays back into our regular everyday lives. And if it doesn't play back into our everyday lives, it's not really faith. That's what the ancients were commended for. They fixed their eyes on heaven, and yet they were faithful in their lives. It's the relationship between faith and faithfulness. My faith helps me to be certain of what I don't see, to be sure of what I hope for, and yet it results in faithful living. That I'm able to overcome the obstacles that are ahead of me that might keep me from losing faith or taking my eyes off of Jesus. Our call is not to escape from the world, but enter into the world. Our faith is a living faith where our future hope plays back into today. My friend Jeff, who I've mentioned to you before, who has colon cancer, is in the final stages of his life. They stopped the chemotherapy. He's 35 years old. He's got twins who are 9 years old and a daughter who's 10. They stopped the chemotherapy a month ago, and so he's at home, and hospice is there. So we talked to him on Friday morning, talked about his memorial service and what he wants people to know through his life, through the celebration of his life. We've never had a conversation like that before. For all years of ministry, I've never been in a situation where I actually have the opportunity to talk to somebody about their memorial service before they die. It's a kind of a weird, amazing, scary, awesome thing to realize you're talking with somebody who within days or weeks will be in heaven, who has a hope of heaven. And as they reflect back on their lives, what they want someone else to know about what's really important in their lives. I met Jeff when he was a sophomore in high school, and his parents had recently divorced. His girlfriend at the time, Kendra, who's now his wife, they had begun dating, and Jeff wasn't a Christian. His parents, they'd gone to church Christmas, Easter, but he really didn't have faith in Jesus. He didn't know what Christmas and Easter were really about. And he popped his head into my office after a senior high night. He popped his head in my office, everybody else had gone, and asked me if we could get a Coke. He said, "I heard that your parents divorced and that you survived. And I wonder if we could get together and talk." And that's what formed our friendship. He was 15. He was led to the Lord by Kendra, sitting out in front of the car. It's amazing what motivates a 15-year-old boy. Basically, she said, you know how important it is for me, Jeff, to date and eventually marry a man who's a Christian. He's like, okay, well, what do I do? She said, so this is a great tip. High school students, this is a great tip. She said, go home, and I want you, do you have a Bible? Yes. He had remember the Good News Bible that had the drawings in it? You have a Bible? Yes. Read the book of Romans. Book of Romans? Oh my, yes, that's what I said. Oh God. And he read through the book of Romans. I don't know if he sped read or if he actually read through it, but he eventually committed his life to Christ. I had the privilege of baptizing him. I hired him as an intern in the summers while he was in college, and then I hired him as my senior high director when he graduated from University of Arizona. I remember sitting on the step at the church, talking to him the summer before his senior year, asking what his plans were. He was a finance business major, was headed for business, and just asked him if he would consider praying that about coming into ministry and working with us. And he did, and worked with us 6 years as a senior high director, went to seminary. I preached at his ordination service. I married, he and Kendra baptized their kids. And so how fitting that we're talking about his death at this time in his life. He's 35 years old. So, it makes me think about this not just as a pie-in-the-sky, way off hope, but the reality of living with the hope of heaven and having that hope play back into our lives. Because I know that Jeff has always believed in heaven, and I know that has shaped his life. He's a different person. Regardless of the obstacles of his life, he's had faith to overcome those obstacles and be faithful to God. So it's very close. And maybe there's someone in your life who is suffering and hurting, and pray that they have the hope of heaven. And allow that to inspire each of us to have a living faith, a hope of what we don't see. So Jeff becomes a friend for the journey, right? He becomes an example of what it will look like for me and what it looks like for others. And his memorial service, he wants people to know the most important thing is a relationship with Jesus and the relationship with people that God puts you in touch with. Most important thing, nothing more important. He becomes a friend for the journey. And the writer of Hebrews gives us friends for the journey as he lists through Hebrews chapter 11 all of those who came before us as examples of faith for us to look to. And he refers to them in verse 1 of chapter 12 as the cloud of witnesses. This is a beautiful image for us to think of this cloud of witnesses who are cheering us on in the race of our lives. Think of finishing a marathon or a 10K or a triathlon and having a cloud of witnesses, the crowd around who's cheering you on. Think of the Olympics and the runners who come back into the stadium after they've run 26 miles out in wherever they are, and they come into the stands and people are cheering for them, right? To endure, to persevere, to make it to the finish line. And the image we have of this hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, the writer refers to them as this cloud of witnesses. Another word that you see in some of the liturgy of the church is the communion of saints. Those who have gone before us, who in some way are cheering us on, who are helping us to persevere, both in their intercession for us, but also as their example for us. And so in Hebrews 11, we have all these examples, and over the next 4 months, you're going to be on a journey with those friends on the journey. They become companions for the journey, and I'm excited. This is a part that I am going to miss, is hearing other pastors and staff preach the messages over the next 4 months. I'm really excited for the opportunity for them to share their own lives and to share examples of these friends of faith, these companions for the journey for all of us. And so we start off next week, and Josh is going to preach 3 weeks on Abraham and Sarah, those who set off because of their faith, sort of in a ridiculous way, barren with the promise of becoming a nation. And they went on a journey with God to the land that he was leading them to. They didn't know where they were. They were like strangers, foreigners in their land. They left by faith. Josh is going to help you to see how Abraham and Sarah can be friends for the journey. Barry's going to preach Memorial Day weekend on Stephen, the first martyr of the church, who died with his eyes fixed on heaven. Juan Daniela is going to preach the next week, which will be the Come Build Hope celebration. And he's going to preach on the Apostle Paul, who was the greatest apostle, and he was the greatest traveler, the one who journeyed to Asia Minor and then to Europe, and because of Paul, established Christianity in the Mediterranean. Stu Montgomery is going to preach on Jacob, the one who wrestled with God and became Israel. And then Clark Cowden, our executive presbyter, the San Diego Presbytery, who worships with us at the 645 service. He's a good friend. He's going to preach in June on Jeremiah, the prophet who spoke to God's people who were on a journey they didn't expect, a journey of exile. And as they were in exile, the message of hope that God gave to his people through Jeremiah on that journey. And then Billy Jack is going to preach on Peter. He's going to tie it in with kids' games. He's going to be teaching the kids on Peter. He's going to preach on Peter for 2 weeks. The one who had his own journey of faith. Peter, who denied Jesus and was restored in John chapter 21. And then in Acts 10, who had his own conversion, realizing that the gospel was for all people, broke through the barrier to the Gentiles. And then Tom is going to preach 3 messages on Jonah, the one whose call from God first led him on a journey away from God before he actually came close to God. And then Thea is going to preach on Deborah, a little-known character in a leader, a woman who was a leader who led the people of God against the Canaanites. Jamie Nelson is going to preach on Ruth and her faithful relationship with Naomi. And then Paul is going to preach 3 messages in August on Moses, the one whose journeys took him away from Egypt to become a shepherd as he ran away from Egypt, and then back to a journey back into the fire of Egypt to rescue God's people, and then a journey back out into the wilderness on the way to leading people to the promised land. This is going to be a great journey, and 2 things are going to happen. You're going to hear about those who the writer of Hebrews and refers to, and others that he doesn't refer to, this cloud of witnesses who become friends for the journey, companions for the journey, these characters of the Old and New Testament who speak to us of faith and faithfulness. That's going to be one outcome. The other is you're going to become friends with the pastors and the staff who preach, because they're going to share their own stories of faith and faithfulness. I'm excited about that. Now, let me tell you one other little sub thing, what I'm excited about them preaching. Those who normally preach, Paula, Josh, Tom, they get the opportunity to preach 3 weeks in a row, which is not something they get to do very often. They preach what we call sort of one-off. They are always preaching my series, and they just preach one sermon at a time. And that's the hardest way to preach as a preacher. Matter of fact, the most preparation I do for a sermon is when I preach at somebody else's church. Because you're sort of out of the rhythm of their church. And it's the same true for our staff. For them to have the opportunity to preach 3 weeks in a row is going to be a gift to them and to you. And then it also gives the rest of our staff who don't get to preach very much the opportunity to preach once or twice. So here's how I want you to approach worship when they're preaching. First, I want you to pray for them. I want you to pray for them and encourage their hearts through prayer. Lift them up in prayer. We have a commitment, especially with our younger staff, to raise up young leaders. And this is an opportunity for them to preach, to pray for them, and then to encourage their hearts. Find something that you loved about what they said and tell them about it. Give them good feedback that will help them to grow in their preaching. I'm excited about that for you and for them. I think this is a real gift, and it's been fun to put together this series over the last 3 months and asking people what they felt called to preach on, what topics and what characters. And it'll be fun to see how that all comes together. I'm going to miss that. I was a fly on the wall to experience that. Maybe I could watch it on YouTube. So, friends for the journey. We have faith for the journey, certain of what we hope for, what we don't see. And God provides for us friends for the journey, examples to us of what it looks like to have a living faith, and for us to commit ourselves to have a living faith when we die. And we don't know whether that's going to be in weeks. We don't know if that's going to be in decades or years, but we know it's going to happen. And we know that one day we're going to see Jesus face to face. And there's going to be a communion of saints. There's going to be a cloud of witnesses. Some of those cloud of witnesses are already in this room who cheer us on earth. And there's those in heaven who cheer us on by their example. Our friends for the journey. And third is, I want to look at our focus for the journey. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. He's the finish line. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Our focus for the journey is fixing our eyes on Jesus. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Our sabbatical theme is pilgrimage and practices. If you didn't get an email from me about our itinerary, there's copies out on the patio. Our theme is pilgrimage and practices. We're going to Christian historic places that will inspire our spiritual practices. Spiritual practices is something we've been focusing on this whole year. If you're in a small group, each week we've had a spiritual practice for you to enter into individually or as a group. Spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines are intended to help us keep our eyes focused on Jesus. To fix our eyes on Jesus means to acknowledge his presence, to be present to the one who is always present to us. Spiritual practices are not a checklist of things that we do to make sure that God looks upon us favorably. They're intended to be an invitation to a journey that leads us to becoming more and more like Jesus for the sake of others. Last August, we began as a staff and as elders and deacons, and then as a congregation, to have spiritual retreats with Larry Warner, who has been with us since last August to help shape this journey of becoming like Jesus for the sake of others. And I'm telling you, it's changing our lives. It's changing my life. And it has become the theme now of our sabbatical, pilgrimage and practices. The opportunity for us to be away for a while in order to practice some things that we don't get an opportunity to practice in a more intense way, to focus our eyes on Jesus. And I want to share with you 7 practices, or maybe categories of practices. There's a few here that there's different ways of approaching it. But 7 practices that are typical for a pilgrimage. And a pilgrimage is an intentional journey that is motivated by our love for God. And the pilgrimage, by its design, is meant for the journey to be as important as the destination. And if the destination is heaven, then the journey toward heaven is as important as the destination itself. If Jesus is the destination, our walking with him is as important as us meeting him face to face, right? So there are 7 practices that are typical of a pilgrimage, and I want to believe that whether we go on sabbatical for 4 months, or we take a day away to be alone with God, or we incorporate practices into our daily lives, all of us are on a journey. Our lives are a journey, and hopefully that journey includes practices that help us keep our eyes focused on Jesus, to fix our eyes on him. And the first practice is paying attention. To pay attention. Leighton Ford, I've been reading his book this year. He focuses on this idea of paying attention, to listen, to live in the moment, to unplug. Now that's hard for us, to live in the moment. Sometimes hope for us keeps us distracted from what's happening right now. We're hoping out in the future for something that might one day come. It becomes irrelevant for our present day. But to unplug, to listen, to not be distracted either by the future concerns or our past experiences, but to be in the moment and to see where Jesus is in the moment with us, to listen, to pay attention, to live in the moment, to unplug. So, the idea of not checking email for 4 months or not having a cell phone. Amy will say, I'm so glad we have a law now so you're not supposed to use your cell phone, which, by the way, nobody actually knows that. People are still driving with no hands on the wheel and texting. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I'm so glad there's a law now because it is just like a reflex to reach down and pick up my smartphone and check a message. Because it's really important that I find out right now who called. And I've got to respond to that text. I mean, what if I don't respond right now? I mean, what are they going to think of me? I mean, come on. I want to just get to it. Amy's like, can you just put that down for a minute? It's hard. Okay, how many people think it's hard? Come on. Cell phone. Come on, be honest. How many of you, the first thing you do, you go into your house and you click on your thing, okay, I wonder if I got an email. You got to check it out. So to not have that, I know there's going to be like a withdrawal time. I'm going to have to be on some medication, something that right? What are they when you're coming off of heroin, they have something, right? What's that called? What's it called? Huh? Methadone. Do they have that for like Textadome or something like that, or Emailodone or something like that will maybe help with withdrawal systems? And we're always thinking about the future. We're concerned about our past. Can we live in the moment and listen? This is what watercolor painting has done for me this year, is to notice things that I never noticed before. Once I began painting a sunset or trying to paint mountains and try to capture mountains so that you're not just brown, and the sky isn't just blue and the grass isn't just green, you begin to look at details and enter into the moment of the experience and go, what would I do with this right now? Wow, that's amazing. Those clouds are kind of purple, but sort of silver. Just to be in the moment and to notice and to pay attention, not just to our surroundings, but pay attention to what God might be saying to us. Second practice is prayer. To pray. One of the practices of a pilgrimage is to have fixed times of prayer, to have a rhythm of prayer. In anticipation of our sabbatical, we plan to go to the Northumbria community, which is near the holy island of Lindisfarne. There's a whole community of spiritual retreat houses there with people who have shaped their lives around certain practices, mostly around fixed prayer. So in this particular place, the Northumbria community, you can check it out online, they commit themselves to praying 4 times a day. And so when you go to the retreat house, it isn't a camp that you're going to. You actually enter into their times of prayer and worship in the morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. And you have meals together, and you pray together. They have fixed times of prayer, and the purpose of a rhythm of prayer is to remind yourselves every few hours that God is present. Because we forget, right? You might have a quiet time in the morning, and then by dinner time, you've totally forgotten the fact that God is present to you. A fixed time of prayer. So we purchased ahead of time a prayer book called The Rhythm of Life. It's a Celtic prayer guide, and it has 4 times of written prayers, a variety of ways of praying around different themes that have helped us just to take our attention off whatever is happening right now and fix our eyes on Jesus, to experience a rhythm of the day through prayer. And then third practice is to read, to meditate, reflect on God's Word, focusing on a few passages at a time and allowing them to sink deeply. Sometimes we call that lectio divina, allowing a divine reading of God's Word. Not to have to read a whole chapter, but to read one line. Or if we're reading one chapter, to allow our eyes, our heart to focus on that one line that God wants to impress on us. A couple weeks ago, I was reading The Prodigal Son out of Luke 15, and I've read that many, many times. And this one time, my eyes landed on the phrase, "But while he was still a long way off, his heart was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." Now, for whatever reason, the time of my life, my son just got married, I longed to hug my boys and kiss them. That was the most significant thing to me, and I just spent time meditating on that one line. What is it like for a father to long for his son? Now, what must it be like for our Heavenly Father to long for us? It was powerful for me. Fourth is to ask questions, to ask simple questions like, what is God doing in me? What is God doing through me? When we hit challenges in our lives, we often go to complaint. Or we say, God, why are you doing this? But we say it sort of like, you shouldn't be doing things like this in my life. But to ask the question, God, what are you doing in my life? When I come to a time of disappointment, discouragement, God, what are you doing in my life right now? What are you doing in me? What do you want to do through me? Maybe another question that we ask. A simple question that reminds us that God is at work in us. God, what are you doing? And it turns the whole circumstance around from trying to ask God to fix situations that are out of my control to asking him to work more intensely in my life. Because that's what he's most concerned about, is my heart. What are the people or the events or the discouragements or the celebrations of my life? How is it calling me to fix my eyes on Jesus? Asking some simple questions. The fifth is to write and reflect. Spending time journaling or in solitude. Having time to write and reflect for me on sabbatical without having a sermon to prepare is going to be a great gift for me. Sixth is to simplify. Now, this is something I have to tell you, the most comments and emails that I've gotten on any message that I've ever preached here is on how we downsized our stuff. We all have a big problem with our stuff. Just want you to know that. Letting go. And this process for us, okay, so the way Amy and I are traveling is we have one roller bag, carry-on roller bag, one roller bag for 4 months. Plus a little day pack, a little carry-on something. But one roller bag, we want to be able to be mobile. We don't want to be weighed down by a bunch of luggage. So when you create the parameters of your packing, you realize I've got to make some decisions. I've got to let go of some things. I can't carry all of my crap with me. I've got to be light here. So I've got 3 pairs of pants, 3 t-shirts, 4 shirts, a couple pairs of underwear, which are, and 2 pairs of shoes. That's it. I can't take a whole lot of books. Who wants to be weighed down books? So instead of taking a whole library with me of things that I want to read, I'm going to ask God to lead us to some books that we're going to want to read. There's a few things we're taking, but God, open our eyes. Draw us to something that would be helpful for us to read. So to simplify, to let go, and to let go of my expectations, to let go of our stuff. The writer of Hebrews says to let go everything that entangles us, right? The sin that trips us up. And there's a lot of stuff in our lives that can trip us up, and we practice letting go or simplifying. And then the last one, the 7th one, is to thank. To give gratitude to God for all I see and all I meet. Gratitude is a great practice. Being thankful for all we see. And I have a feeling that as we're on our journey and we long for friends, when we realize how much we miss all of you. Somebody has said, by the way, which is kind of silly to me, it's so odd, well, you're coming back, right? Well, first of all, it's in the policy I have to come back. I've got to serve another year. So let's see, I come back, let's just say Labor Day is the marker, okay? So I have to at least stay a year. I have to be here at least Labor Day 11. But that's silly to me because we love you and we love this church. And there's nothing in us at all that says we're not coming back. So I have a feeling when we give thanks to God, express our gratitude to Him, that we're going to be thanking Him for you. And we're going to be thanking Him for sunsets that we're not looking at every day. And family that we long for. So what I want you to do is take a few moments. If we're all on a journey together, and I'm going on a journey, we're committing ourselves to these 7 practices. And I don't have an agenda. I don't know exactly how they're all going to work out. I don't know that at 9 o'clock we're going to do this, and 11 o'clock we're going to do this, and 2 o'clock we're going to do this. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but I want to be open to incorporating these 7 practices into our lives. And I want you to be open as well, because you're on a journey and we're on a journey. And when we come back in September, I want to hear about your journey. I want to hear about how spiritual practices help to shape you and to focus you and to fix your eyes on Jesus. I want to hear about that. And I want you to hear from us what it's been like for us. I want to hear about your journey, and I want you to hear about ours. I want to hear about your experiences. I want to hear what God has done, how God has been faithful to you. And I want you to hear those stories from us as well. We're on a journey together, a journey of faith, and we have great companions. We are companions for each other. Scripture provides us companions for the journey. Let's enjoy the journey together. I want you to take a look at these 7 practices in some time of silence before we enter into communion. And I want you to just look at these and just see where is God focusing your attention? Which of these would you like to be challenged with? Which of these are you already practicing? Like, you know what, I really love doing that. I love to journal. I just don't do it. One of those things, and just make a check mark along the side there of things that you think you might do. 3 or 4 of them, because they're not all daily, they're not all hourly. And be open to incorporating some practices that'll help you run the journey with perseverance. Let's take a few moments of silent reflection.